Except
I mean,
you
not Laurel.
usually go first and usually go second. So after
But we have this, which I can talk about if you want. Basically, I was going to say your meetup. Mine doesn't.
We'll be off stage and we'll run in.
Okay. You don't like Tim out there?
Tim invited us to speak and then decided that it was too boring and did not show up.
All right.
All right. So thank you for coming to our meeting tonight, on May 14th, 2018 meeting. We have a really good lineup. We have Jess Chadwick, Todd Snyder, and Chris Gomez. And what they are going to do is they're going to talk about Build and all the new things that are in Azure, like every single one of them.
You're right. We actually should have started at 6 if we're going to
Right,
do that.
exactly. So normally we go through a list of things. One is what's new in Azure. Since that's what we're going to talk about, we're not going to talk about that in the introduction. Other things that we can talk about are who's hiring here. Whoever is hiring, please raise your hand. And maybe if you have something to say about what you're looking for. Okay. And if anybody here is looking for that type of position or knows somebody, why don't you hook up and exchange cards? Okay, my name is Brian Manissi. I'm one of the organizers here, so I'm really happy that we have these monthly meetings and we have these great topics. So tonight's format's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to have somebody coming up and speaking. It's going to be more of an open forum type of discussion where all three people are going to be up here speaking, hopefully not at the exact same time, but together. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Does anyone else have anything to say before we start?
No, if everybody can hear me okay, then I think what I'll do is just go over some of the business. We're also streaming live on Mixer.com. So if you ever don't come out here one night, we are at Mixer.com/Philly Azure. All of our meetups are recorded and posted on the YouTube channel. The YouTube link, when we get 100 subscribers, we can make a nice custom channel. But what I like to do to remember is go to bit.ly/PHL Azure on YT. Did I get that right? Look at that. And you will get to Philly Azure. And every meeting is recorded and posted up here. So if you either can't make it or maybe you can't watch us stream on Mixer, then you can definitely go there. And the three of us are together the Static Void podcast. So what we thought we would do tonight is we usually sit separately in our homes and record the Static Void podcast. We're going to do an experiment here tonight. We are going to recap build. We are also recording our podcast. So we're going to start off with our probably corny sounding introduction and get into some topics that we've laid out, and probably at various points along the way get some participation as well. So how many people here listen to Static Void podcast? Anybody? Awesome. Cool. Thank you for listening. We are at staticvoidpodcast.com.
More than zero is great.
Yeah, more than zero is good. There's definitely some people who ask me, why haven't you dropped a podcast lately? So this is what we're doing. Here we go. So this will be a little rough, and we know it, but that's okay. That's a live podcast. So I'm going to start it off. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void podcast.
I'm Jess Chadwick.
I'm Todd Slider.
And I'm Chris Gomez, and we're your hosts. We are recording this on the evening of May 14th, 2018, and recording live from the Philly Azure user group in Malvern, PA, live on mixer.com/Philly Azure. And you can find us at the www.staticvoidpodcast.com. Typically, our podcast is for developers and helping them specifically with what you can take to work Monday morning. That's one of our mottos. So dive deep into technical topics without trying to read code to each other. And tonight we are going to talk about what we learned that's important to our audience at Build 2018. There was a lot announced, and I think the three of us have been hiding from each other our thoughts on overall Microsoft vision, on what was actually discussed. And the reason why we do that is because if we all talked about it ahead of time, then we'd come here and it would be, Jess, didn't you think you said something? It'd be very robotic. So what were some of the keynote themes we wanted to talk about tonight? For instance, one of them, if I just go down this bullet point list and then we come back to the themes, right, is we said, okay, one thing we found interesting is that Apple and Amazon were incorporated into the keynote. We will come back to a great quote. We thought this was like the quote of the first day, right? Satya Nadella. Oh boy, I butchered that. Satya Nadella saying, "Privacy is a fundamental human right, and they are creating a program to protect our democracy." Azure.
Where's the accent, man? You gotta, we'll get it by the end of the night.
No, yes. I know. And then Azure positioned as the intelligent cloud and intelligent edge with more regions than any other public cloud. A lot of focus on AI and bots and machine learning. And then on day 2, we learned a lot about what's coming to Windows, but a focus on usability improvements. So getting back to the beginning of that, I think I'll start with you, Jess. What was your take when you saw moments like Apple on stage, Alexa on stage with Microsoft developers?
Yeah, well, I mean, so that Satya came out in like the very first minute, almost practically the first thing he said was, hey, Bill Gates was talking about Apple stock, right? So immediately he starts bringing in other companies, competitors, right? And then they actually bring out an Amazon exec out onto the stage, and they show off the demo that they showed. I would love if we could play it, but we didn't really have anything queued up. The demo that they showed was actually Cortana and Alexa not talking to each other, but working with each other. So saying, Cortana, ask Alexa to do something for me, and then Alexa, ask Cortana. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like my initial reaction was just, why? Like generally you choose one, you use one, and that's what it is, right? I think the point that they were making, the demo that they were doing is like you're managing your calendar and email in O365. And so you're integrating with, you're using Cortana to talk to the Microsoft services.
What are my appointments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the overall, the point, I guess, that they were trying to get to.
The Dog and Pony Show was the idea that they could tell Alexis to talk to Office 365 via Cortana and schedule an appointment or something.
I didn't really get the value.
Alexa, go get me an Uber, right? Or the skills that you would use on an Alexa, maybe through Cortana, right? Cortana Ask Alexa. Although I don't know if that was the exact. I already forget now if that was the exact verbiage, but certainly it was interesting on stage together. It reminded me of the Google moment with TypeScript a couple years ago, where they said, "Yeah, TypeScript is, we really love TypeScript. It's really great. We think it's going to take over. Oh, and by the way, guess who's adopting it?" And here comes the Angular team saying, "We bought in."
They literally had a slide: Microsoft Heart Google.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like,
So in the last few years, we have Microsoft Heart,
Amazon.
Google, Linux, Amazon, but I didn't see the Heart Apple one up there.
No hearts here.
So okay,
They did. He also said, Satya said, our friends across the lake when he was talking about the integration with Amazon and Alexa. It was interesting.
Analogy.
so
Are you queuing something up here?
no, I was just showing. I was trying to show some of the video, no sound, which is fine, but like, see, here's you're in Cortana. You ask Alexa for some help, and Alexa returns it. I do remember seeing this. It's interesting, but again, those are for the viewers online. The folks listening are saying, "What are you talking about?" So, when it came to Azure, and I thought a focus on AI and bots. Do you want to start with that, Todd? Maybe something about bots or AI, or where you found it's going to fit into your developer life?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaway I take from all of this is basically, if you're a Microsoft Stack developer, Azure is your platform more than Windows moving forward. And as part of that ecosystem, now you can take advantage of what Microsoft is providing via Azure, the bot frameworks, the AI stuff. And this is really where Microsoft has always exceeded compared to the competitors. Instead of giving you a bunch of tools and like, here, go figure it all out, Microsoft's like, here's a Visual Studio template. Click a few buttons and now you have a bot, or now you have an AI framework, and it's already hooking into Azure. So to me, that's the idea that in the past, you'd build something and your main intent was to deploy it to Windows Server or Windows Client. Now it seems like your main intent is to deploy it to Azure. Azure is your platform, your target platform.
And and you kind of felt that was the theme.
Yes, to me that when you few years in the future we look back, this will be the day that we all say this is where Azure sort of became the
Right,
main.
which is interesting because in the past Windows would take front and center on day one, right?
Sure.
And now this year it was flipped. It was Azure was all Azure day one keynote, and then Windows was day two. And
Almost a second
to
class
me, it was
citizen.
almost like it was like an
Well,
afterthought.
For the last several builds, there had always been that moment where they told us how many Windows devices there were.
Right.
Especially the Windows 8 timeframe. There was always that moment where they're like, "Hey, folks, we're up to 20 million or something, or 200 million or 500 million." And a few years ago, they promised the billion number for Windows 10,
which then they got to like 800
and
million.
Well, I don't know that number. I don't think they talked about it anymore.
No,
I think it was just Azure, right?
I think they pulled back on that, and they're either at 800 million now, or that's their new target, for the end of the year. But yeah.
So Microsoft being an Azure company, I think it's something that we've seen coming, but it was almost like this was the
official
this is
ribbon
the year,
cutting
right?
ceremony.
This is it, right?
We just got a month or two after everything, the Windows team sort of split, and a lot of it got pushed underneath the Azure ecosystem. So
I think for me, especially when we're in this show, in the podcast, when we talk about, what can you bring to work tomorrow? I'm looking at these things and saying, where should I go tomorrow? Where should I kind of be looking forward? And I'm looking at all this announcement for Azure, and it's very clearly showing Azure is the way forward, right?
Yeah.
And so that's two things. How do I learn Azure, which is a huge scope, but also how is Windows development relevant anymore? Like, is it relevant anymore? And if so, should I continue to be investing? I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
I think it depends. I mean, the server's still relevant, right? At the end of the day, we're still building web server type technology that is deployed on Azure, maybe containers or functions are now, but at the end of the day, it's still a Windows type thing. Today, since all that stuff runs on Linux, though, who's to say that in a few years your main target on the server won't be Linux on Azure? You won't even care about you won't care about the hardware or the OS.
Right.
But on the desktop, I mean, nothing ever goes away, right? That's the reality. But if you're not building or maintaining an application today, if someone came to your boss, came to you tomorrow and said, let's build a new application, building a desktop Windows application is probably way down the list. If anything, you would build your main applications, web application, and then it may be an extension point or something, admin pieces or something as Windows. You would not purposely build just a traditional Windows client server app. It just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, what about, so, if you're an enterprise that's already made a huge investment in something like .NET, it wasn't really, I think, the focus of it, but is there still going to be the idea of preserving that investment with things like Xamarin? Or is it, hey folks, web technology, right? This is what you want, and your client's going to be thin up front, and you're going to put your backends up in the cloud, whoever's cloud it is.
Well, I think a lot of the communications that's outside of Azure is around making those folks feel good. You know, like you've already invested in Windows technologies. You're not being abandoned. You're still going to be a first-class citizen. You know, everything's going to work, and we'll maybe even still give you updates, but you should be getting on Azure.
I think something interesting, a couple of things they announced that sort of were announced, not in the main keynotes, but later on. They added a number of features. I can't remember at the top of my head what they were, but things that already existed for Android and Windows, they made it available for iOS.
Yeah.
And one of the other big takeaways I take from all this is, and this is sort of why I mean the switching of Azure is now the platform, is they don't seem to care anymore what the client OS is. You want to run iOS? Great. We'll make sure all your stuff works on Azure. Android, don't care. Windows, great. You want to work on a HoloLens? Great. It's going to hook on to Azure. To me, it was that Azure is that platform that connects all this technology together, where you're a Windows guy, iOS, Android, whatever.
Yeah.
The client OS is irrelevant.
It's the fabric. Let me see. I captured a couple of quotes, my favorite quotes. So I already said our partners across the lake, when he was talking about Amazon, Chris said privacy is a fundamental human right. So Satya Nadella is up there saying privacy is a fundamental human right, and kind of in the context of everything that's happening today, they're kind of putting their foot down, right? I thought that was a little bit political. I was surprised.
Yeah, a little in Facebook's face.
You know? Yeah. And then also along the same lines, they're creating a program to protect our democracy. So they didn't really get specific about what that was, but I mean, it sounds.
I think it was tied to privacy.
But so on the Azure side, it said they were talking about intelligent cloud, intelligent edge. So that I know, especially with Satya, he likes to say that cloud first or mobile first, cloud first, that kind of stuff. Like that, double down on those things. And that was his big thing here, was intelligent cloud, intelligent edge. So it was like pushing that power to the edge. But IoT devices ended up taking a main stage, I think, throughout the event, and even in the keynote.
Did anyone hear the mobile first, cloud first phrase this year?
No,
I was specifically listening for that. I didn't hear
so
it
that phrasing may be gone.
Yeah. Well, now it's intelligent cloud, intelligent edge.
Even IoT, it was sort of mentioned, but it was mentioned in the context of the demo. It was like, it's just a device. It's your refrigerator talking to Azure. Everything was like X Azure, X Azure.
This was the quote I was looking for. Ubiquitous computing fabric, complete to the intelligent edge. So he's
everything has to be fabric or core.
Computing fabric, yes.
Fabric or core.
Yeah. So how many of you actually listened to the keynote at least, or any of the other videos and builds? Yeah. I mean, anybody have any other
And we do have
takeaways?
some mics.
Yeah, we have a couple of mics we could pass around.
So
Any
if anybody
takeaways
wanted to say
from that?
anything
Anything that hit you?
something that we missed or want to talk about, or we can get to it too, because we got some more stuff to talk about too.
Any of your favorite Satya quotes? I'm big on Satya quotes, especially when Chris says them.
I like listening to Satya. I've always said that yes. In the days of Ballmer, it was like the room was on fire.
Right, in your face.
And today it's like I'm listening, I'm at a fireside, and it's very soothing. And
Grandpa tell a whole story about how it was back in
it
the
actually makes
day.
you very comfortable. Like, don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Right, the cloud's going to take
We
over
have
everything.
Azure.
Skynet's coming, but it's fine.
So I think another big theme after the keynote is they started to drive home to developers, okay, now what does this mean? And the two big things from my perspective were .NET Core 2.1 release candidate 1 is out and live, and that's that good old-fashioned marketing naming.
Yes.
It has a go live license, so that essentially means go ahead. You're just committing to you're committing to going to the final release if you take it, but you can actually call them up and say, "I'm broken, help me," which you can't do before go live. So that was big. Especially because there's a couple little interesting tidbits in here. And I was looking for a summary blog post, and Scott Hanselman has one on his blog. A few years ago, I heard some whispers about smaller Linux distributions. And so 2.1 supports Alpine, and the idea, again, is get smaller, lighter Linux distributions with only what you need. Makes me wonder if eventually they're going to try to get to a day where your .NET Core Docker container is a couple of megabytes instead of hundreds. And of course, on server core, a couple gigs.
Well, and so this is important because nowhere on that line does it say Linux, but Alpine is Linux, right? I mean, so we're talking about .NET Core, and they're advertising how they can run on the smallest
Right.
Linux OS, right?
And
That's the emphasis.
And
That's
compiles
the
on Raspberry Pi,
yeah.
which was different. Before, you could go compile it yourself and then go run it on Raspberry Pi. But now you have .NET Core 2.1 supported on Raspberry Pi 2. And they even say, like, hey, you can even compile on it. Like, it takes forever, but you could do it.
Yeah.
So
that sort of very ties into the whole idea of they kept talking about the edge, IoT edge or AI edge. And what I took away from all that was the idea that we're moving away from the traditional computing model, right? We had big green terminals, eventually we had PCs, we had client server, then we had everything to the server. The IoT and AI is basically doing the same thing. Instead of trying to run everything on the server, now you're trying to bring the pieces that make sense to the devices. And by having nice, small little OSs, they're purposely designed to do whatever they want you to do correctly and small. They're not aiming at trying to be 100 different things, right? What is the big problem with Windows? It tries to solve 1,000 different problems, where most of us need 2 features from it.
Yeah.
So
right.
to me, that again is the idea that things are changing. This is no longer, you no longer think of yourself as a Windows developer. You've really got to think of yourself as a Microsoft Stack developer, which means Azure better be on your resume if you want to say you're a Microsoft Stack developer.
So that's interesting. So I'm combining what you guys both said. Like, you've literally got a blog post from Hanselman on here, and you're citing that as like the best summary of what was released at Build, which
for
is
.NET Core.
for .NET Core for non-Azure.
Yeah.
For
Right.
development that's non-Azure.
Right.
And I came to that same conclusion. Literally, this same blog post. I'm twinning at your screen, but everybody else is seeing this same blog post is the definitive source,
right?
Which I found weird too. Like, if you want to look for any information outside of development with Azure, you're going to Hanselman.
What you really want to do is you really want to watch the .NET 3 the .NET Core 3 roadmap talk with Hunter.
So right, so I'm not saying they didn't have
like
content. They
the
had
problem
plenty of
was
content.
they're just standing there talking. It wasn't the most exciting.
but even the summaries, right, and then all the marketing and everything around it was all Azure. Like, you didn't hear it. And there's a couple cool things. So I don't know if it was in here, but there was also the release of it was released privately, the live share. So has anybody heard of the live share? It's actually in beta. It's been in beta or preview for a while. So I'm getting the name right. It was
Visual Studio Live Share. Yep.
So
I actually am curious about this. Who knows about Visual Studio Live Share? Okay, so I'm going to say half the room, which I think that's good. And I also think it's
has anybody used it?
A little bit of a failure, right, on Microsoft's part, because this is probably the biggest thing they've done on tooling side in a long time.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is huge, and it's now available in public preview. Any of us can go sign up and get in on this.
And I believe it's free. There's no charge, even though it's using
just
Azure.
part of having Visual Studio 2017 or Visual Studio Code. One of those two.
And they interrupt together. You can
they interrupt together.
2017.
Right. You can be on code in Linux, and I can be on Visual Studio in Windows.
Yeah.
I've heard there's some bugs there, but that support was just released. And the besides the experience of a shared editing experience, where you can even see in their little demo screenshot here, you've got Amanda Silver's tag because she's highlighting that code.
Yeah.
And someone else could be highlighting, and you could have 6 people. That might be a current max, but I don't think it's a hard cap. I think they're trying to get a lot more. You can also set breakpoints, and you can run. And then if you run your ASP.NET Core website in live share, a web browser opens up on my screen and it hits your breakpoint, and I see it hit too, and we see the same memory and the same debugging, and I could be in code and you can be in Visual Studio Community or Enterprise.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
A couple quick points on that. Number one, as a development community, we are more and more being a distributed type of development community. You're working with developers across the world, or even down the street, you're remotely working with them. The other thing is think about it from educational point of view, right? You could have people, whether professors or even for younger kids, experts at something, and they can now work with the kids and see something real, as opposed to just following instructions or whatever.
Yeah.
They could actually deal with them.
Yeah.
Real live doing things, and it's amazing.
There are a couple other IDEs out there. Most of them are cloud-based that have done something similar. I've really kept tabs on this space because I look for new tools to help people I'm talking introductory hackathons, where you're teaching people from nothing to creating their first website. And there's a high school hackathon I participate in where the students were building their first web page using HTML and CSS. and we had chosen some very basic tools. And here's why I think this is super huge. The kids, these are high school, middle school kids. To them, they could not fathom why the 4 of them on a team couldn't do this. They thought this should just be natural because that's what they do.
Right?
This is what they do today with their homework because they're using
Google Docs.
Google Docs,
this
that
is
competitor's
Google Docs
thing,
for Visual Studio.
right? But they're using they're for instance, my wife's school, they use Google Docs.
Yeah.
And so the kids do collaborate that way, typing together on the same document. And they asked me, they said, well, why can't we work together? And I was like, oh yeah, how
right.
about that? And then, but next year, I think we're going to have this tool. There's a couple other competitors doing something similar, but to have this in the enterprise is huge.
Yeah.
So no, LiveShare wasn't a huge announcement. I think they first kind of dropped it on the world at Connect last November, and now it's officially public preview.
Sounds about right.
So here we go with that.
I think it brings a whole new meaning to works on my machine.
Yes, and they talked about a lot on there, right?
Yeah.
The idea. 2 other quick takeaways from that. Number 1, I thought it was interesting was they did the whole, in their demo, they did the whole one person was on code, one person was on Visual Studio. And what was interesting was the main developer was on code. When the other person got the code, they never had the code before. They got it from that machine, made changes, and basically were able to re-check in back to you without any other third party or source control or anything involved. Yeah. The second thing is, think about this from Microsoft's point of view, right? For their enterprise customers. What if you had someone from the development team, the ASP.NET development team, could work directly with someone who's having a production problem? Now you could actually step through the code. That's huge. It's huge to be able to instill into developers that kind of like live expertise.
Collaboration.
And collaboration.
Yep.
So yeah, a very common feature of Jeff Fritz is a friend of the Philly community and a friend of the show. He's been on the show.
He's criticized the show.
Yes. He's our number 1 fan.
Within Microsoft, which is great. He's a program manager on the ASP.NET team. And at twitch.tv/C#Fritz 3 times a week, he has a live stream and he has a lot of guests on. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is this has been a staple of his show, but I think this was a really good example of it here, was he and Scott Kate were working, and for convenience sake, they actually were sitting next to each other, but on separate laptops. And the reason was Jeff has a project he's working on that he thought could benefit from the computer vision API. Scott was brought on to help him with it. Well, instead of collaborating ahead of time, Scott has his laptop with the code he's already familiar with. They live share it up, and Scott's cutting and pasting like, hey, here's how you get Vision API working right into Jeff's project. And they are, even though they're sitting together, but there's other videos here of Jeff collaborating with someone remotely. Live share has been a staple on his stream since it came out, and I think it's been huge. And so, he's going to love that I'm basically saying, hey, everybody go watch C#Fritz. He's been a friend to us, and his stream is great. It's really, really growing, and this whole concept of developer streaming is also growing too. They also announced .NET Core 3, and I think, as you can see, what Hanselman starts with, Scott Hanselman's first thing, and you can see the slide, .NET Core 3 is the focus on desktop and saying, we're going to make .NET Core 3 work with UWP, WPF, Windows Forms. The idea being you can start to move to take advantage of .NET Core features. You're still on Windows. This is not cross-platform WPF, which would have probably gotten, the roof would have come down if somehow that could have been announced, right?
Yes.
Cross-platform anything. But it enables things like you build a control in UWP, you could go use it back in WinForms, which there's always been that kind of hostability. You could take WPF and host it in WinForms, or WinForms will host WPF. Heck, you could go host MFC back in WPF.
EF6 too, right?
Sure,
That's
EF6.
That's pretty huge too.
I think EF6 is actually a big takeaway from here.
Yeah.
That's a huge investment to migrate it over. The fact that you can now have a core app that works with EF6 is huge.
So the focus for .NET Core 3 then, okay, we're just reading the emphasis from one blog, and to be fair, you can go watch what the 2 of them actually talked about. It's not on new features. It's on, hey, let's bring your enterprise up to .NET Core because you've been holding back.
No, well, bring that slide back up again. I love that slide.
It's almost tooling.
Cross-platform plus Windows only. I mean, if that's not Microsoft, I don't know what it is, right? We support everything and then
And then we
Windows
support
stuff.
Windows too.
Yeah.
So another key takeaway, and I've been working on a project where we have a case where we need to actually deploy something in Azure. We're also need to deploy it on premise. So we've been trying to standardize on .NET Standard. I think that's another big takeaway. If you're not running your stuff for .NET Standard now, you're missing the boat. You really need to start thinking in that term, because that's how they're going to make all this work. But
Well,
even
why wouldn't you? I know we had a .NET Standard show, which we only had one listener, so nobody else heard it. But we had a .NET Standard show talking about why would you use
And
it?
I think
Like,
at the time-
why wouldn't you use .NET Standard?
I thought
Why
at the time
wouldn't
we
you
were all
just-
like, "What the hell is .NET Standard?"
Oh yeah,
That was-
Look, people get confused.
that was the
right?
show.
What
Is what the hell is
standard?
.NET Standard? But
It's just the standard APIs, right?
yeah, but right now, why wouldn't you? Right? If you're creating new libraries,
It makes sense, and I think that's if you read a little more. I think it's in this article or maybe in a different one. They talk a lot about it. They're going to have .NET Standard 3 along with Core 3.
Yeah.
So really take advantage of all this stuff. That's where your bang for the buck is. And think about it again when I talked about before the idea that Windows still has a place, but its place may be more specific to certain features of your application. So if I have a .NET ASP application and I have a core piece, I don't know, some calculation engine, right, or some tax engine, but maybe I also want to be able to deploy that in a limited amount on premise for a set of developers or set of users using Windows.
Yeah.
If I follow the .NET Standard way, this gives me a way to build that ecosystem without having to reinvent it or keep it in sync or write code twice.
So one of the features that was discussed here, self-contained exes. The idea being
Yes,
that
all wrapped in one.
right. No, you don't even have to install. Well, obviously, you're not installing .NET Framework. So just the fact that you would rely on .NET Core 3 presents the age-old problem of how do I get this on someone's system? And
Yep.
today the answer is, well, we just assume everybody has .NET Framework because when they don't, we force them to go get it. And here comes 100 megs of download and registry entries, and it infects your Windows box. Yeah, like why don't you, have
Windows,
4.7.2, right?
Yeah.
You should have it.
Yeah, but think about what version of .NET Framework, right?
Exactly.
Like Windows came with 4.5 or something.
And
Now
it's
we're up to
become-
4.7, 4.8, or whatever.
It's become a bigger and bigger problem, especially on the server side, where if
Yep.
you're a server administrator and your team comes with you with one more app, and it's like, well, now this is going to make you upgrade your whole server. That's scary time. That's nervous time for an administrator. Even though, we promise it's backward compatible. We promise you.
No, I just left a company that they had 300 applications running on their servers. They would just stack applications, and you're going to say, "I'm going to upgrade your,
Yeah.
I'm going to upgrade your
Let's
version
go to
of
Framework
.NET,"
4.7.2. They're
You'll
like,
be fine.
Sure. Yeah, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
Cross your fingers.
So
Right.
besides the side-by-side support, which I think has been a fundamental feature of .NET Core from day one, is that your app runs with, if you choose, your app runs with the .NET Core version that you specify. In fact, not just the .NET Core version, these bits.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those
If you want to do the shared model, you can do it, even on Linux, even on Windows, whatever. But if you really want to say, no, I want it to be those bits in that folder, you can make it happen. And now they're saying, forget all that. Here's a self-contained exe.
Yeah.
Just one. Boom. Here you go.
Not even a zip file anymore. Just
Tree shake out the
one
stuff
thing.
you're not
Yeah.
using. So, so the takeaway for 3, what was the takeaway for 2? Was it, okay, we're ready now? Oh, no, actually, I know what it was. The .NET Standard 2 takeaway was we brought a ton of APIs back.
Yeah, we
A
had the ones you
ton.
asked for, the ones we're missing.
Right. We were missing
Meaning,
a bunch of
okay,
stuff.
Yes, you can use
Okay,
it.
we're ready.
Yeah.
But the takeaway for 3 is, okay, now it's time. Take your WinForms investment, your WPF investment, the 300 apps, and get them running against .NET Core.
Is it? I don't know.
I mean, it's the message, but how many people are going to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's the open question.
I think it's not even the .NET Core 3 side of this. It is the Windows side, which is,
Okay.
hey, now you can
Right.
bring UWT, WPF, Windows Forms apps. If you've been looking at your WinForms app and saying, I can't go to .NET Core, well, now you kind of can.
Right. Is anybody using .NET Core here at work? 3? So a smaller percentage than folks that knew about LiveShare. And I see that a lot. Like, we talk about it. I think there's a lot of talk going on about .NET Core, but then you go to, like, well, who's actually using it at work?
Yeah.
I think the number is still small. And I wonder, what does that mean? We're already on .NET Core 2, 3 coming out next year,
Well,
and
remember,
we're
it's
still
the golden rule,
talking
third
about
version till you move.
it? Maybe. Is it 3? It used to be 2. We're up to 3 versions
No, it's
now
always
before
3
you
in
move?
my book.
What I want to, did you guys migrate or was it a rewrite? New, yeah.
Yeah, so both people said new project.
Sure, yeah. Right.
And I think that's going to be the
Yeah.
typical thing. Someone's like, hey, we have to build something new. We might as well use Core. Again, that's what I take away from this. Hanselman's talking about it, right?
Right.
The link is going to be, I might as well use Core now. Or are you going to use .NET Standard?
Yeah.
Think about it. Would anyone build a web form app today? Yeah, there's still some people, but
Yeah.
We should
And so
take-
I'm also interested for those shared components, those old components. Did you just copy that code over, or did you do like a .NET standard library or anything like that? What was your approach there?
Yeah, it was .NET standard, but using the old libraries. So we're still apps
.NET
that
standard
are
using the old libraries.
So
Yeah.
targeting
like,
.NET standard.
The apps that kind of built the thing in the end were over time, and that's why it's like earlier on, really the full like .NET Core standard, and then the next thing was .NET standard. This version, then it was .NET standard, that version. So
Yeah.
slowly moving it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that is the approach, right? And so here's what that tells you. What does that tell you for a department in a big enterprise with 300 apps?
Oh, I can tell you,
It's
it wasn't
never
on
gonna
our radar.
happen, right?
Yeah. The only people talking about it were the architects.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which means a couple apps will move and the other ones will stay, right?
Oh, and it was only
how many
new,
applications
it was
still
only
run .NET
greenfield
2.0,
stuff.
right? Or 3.5 or something. There's plenty of them out there.
So one thing that didn't get a lot of focus, which I think rightly so, but I think might have a lot of excitement in this room, is Blazor. So who here knows about Blazor? Okay. Not a huge number, which is probably okay.
But more
That's
than
probably
Core.
fine. More
Remember
than
that number was higher
more
than
than the
Core.
folks who are using .NET
Right.
Core at work every day.
That's still less than LimeShare.
So in a nutshell, Blazor is an experimental .NET framework where you use C# and Razor and HTML, but the end result runs in the browser using WebAssembly. So I guess one way to think of this is like, imagine that you had React, but your code wasn't JavaScript, it was C#, and your .NET DLL goes down to the browser where it is run in WebAssembly.
Right. Or imagine that you had Silverlight back.
Without plugins
Yes,
and with
without plugins.
completely with web standards,
Right.
which I think is a huge differentiator, right?
And running on Mono. Because
And-
Mono is the runtime for
And they
Blazor
didn't
now.
try to replicate the I don't know if it was a mistake. They didn't go down the path of here's a whole nother language. I mean,
Right.
the C# and Razor, it's that HTML feel that Razor has, not the WPF feel that
Right.
Silverlight has, right?
Yes. Yeah, you don't
But
have to learn XAML or some other web or
Well, I mean,
target lag-
so this project has 4,847 stars.
And
On
it's a little
GitHub.
more than a POC.
It's just a proof of concept. And
It's
the only
basic
reason why I bring
R&D.
that up is if we go to something like Home, it has 7,000 stars. So it's like 5/7 of the way there. And when you start looking at other stuff in the ASP.NET, it doesn't even register. So people are voting both with the number of forks, the number of watches, the number of stars, saying, oh my gosh, please.
Yeah.
But it's so far an experiment that it wasn't, which I think rightly, it wasn't,
yeah.
they didn't focus on it, say like, you're going to have this tomorrow, because we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yes.
There's
But
a lot of work
I think
to do
it's
there.
also beneficial to kind of dig into WebAssembly. So really, WebAssembly is not a Microsoft thing. It is a web standard to the point that it's in all major browsers today. And it's there. They did one of the first big demos, at least that I had heard, was they took Doom, that was written in C, C++, whatever it was. They compiled it down and ran it natively in
right.
WebAssembly in the browser using code that's already in all the browsers, right? So this is like WebAssembly is the plugin that's not a plugin. It's already there for
It's a
everybody,
VM.
right?
It's the best way to get it. It's a VM running in your browser that can interpret WebAssembly. Anything can compile into WebAssembly,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah, it's
Blazor
the
is
thing that
specifically
we
aimed
would use
at
plugins for
Taking
before.
ASP.NET skills, Razor Tech, C# and stuff, compiling it down into WebAssembly. The biggest thing I think confuses people, it's not a server-side tech. It's a client-side
Right.
framework.
Right.
So if in a year or two, when this is mature enough, you as a web developer will decide, do I want to use React, Angular, or Blazor? Or some other like framework
Right.
that gives you WebAssembly.
With Blazor being a play on words on Razor, because that's
Yes.
the language that you're using
In the
Razor
browser.
markup. That's what I played around with Blazor for a little bit, and that's what really kind of weirded me out. Is I'm used to writing Razor pages on the server and handling form posts and rendering stuff back down in the browser.
But
And
that's
here you
not it.
are
Yeah.
managing state in the browser with the same languages, and it was
Yeah.
weird to me. I don't mean that negative in any way. It's just like if you're used to using Razor for the past 10 years now in a certain way on the server side, and then you go to
Yes.
use it on the browser, so it's a little weird. It takes a little getting used to.
So I think a Blazor show is coming.
Sure.
it's
Oh, yeah.
huge.
Oh, yeah.
We're just going to have to dig into it and work with it. It kind of feels to me like it's the answer to the developer who, for many years, has come to me and asked me, so you guys talk about all that. You guys up at Code Camp are talking about React and Angular and Vue, but we still use MVC3 at work. Am I getting left behind? I hear that a lot. And it's like, well, heck, obviously not, because there's a ton of MVC code out there that still needs to be written and maintained. I mean, in fact, you're working on an MVC5 course, so it's not gone.
Yeah.
It's just not hot. It's not the fad. And sometimes we get nervous.
Depends on how you define hot.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got lynda.com courses. I've got 5 active ones right now, and
Yeah.
my MVC4 one is
Right.
the one that is the most
People
active
still
right
need
now.
the
It's-
training. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously.
You're supporting apps. I mean, it's out
I
there.
think that the big takeaway from all of that is you just listed out 3 of the top frameworks. If you were to use, I guess, JavaScript.com, I forget what it is, there's hundreds of these frameworks,
Oh yeah.
which is part of the problem in the JavaScript ecospace. There's too much choice, and none of them are right. They're good for certain things, and then other things they're overkill, and other things they just make a mess. So we were talking about this a lot before, right? If it's in the box, the fact the biggest thing to me with Blazor today was within a month of them announcing it, I go right into Visual Studio, click a template. 5 minutes later, I'm a WebAssembly Blazor developer. I have a working demo.
Yeah, it wasn't actually that. The concepts were pretty familiar.
Yes.
That's what I kind of struck me was, okay, if you've used React or Vue, it's gonna the component side of it will feel that way, and if you've used MVC, well, I hate to call it code behind because that's not what it is, but the code that runs the components
Yes.
feels
I mean, the big takeaway is
like a controller or
You don't really
something.
have controllers per se.
right.
The other big takeaway is, and this is for everybody who's currently working in frameworks, really focus on templating. That is the holy grail of all these frameworks. Don't bind yourself to a framework. They all work with templating. If you're working today in React using templating, there's going to be a way for you to move to Blazor.
What does that mean?
Templating as an HTML templates. Think of your page as a set of components, componentization of your app, and think about the HTML as the template, the core piece of whatever. I'm showing a search result. That should be a component with a template. And it's very easy to migrate. The concepts are the same. The HTML will almost be the same. So the binding and stuff will be a little different, but the concept is the same.
So
So
also for the live share, if you jump back to that tab, the animated GIF that they were showing, they're using React code. They're demoing React code, not .NET Core or
Yes.
MVC. I'll just point that out. Pretty interesting.
yeah, well,
Throwing that out there.
Well, because they're building web app. I mean, Moz use the most popular framework.
it's been a few years now that the walkout on stage demo at a Build or an Ignite or a Connect has been, hey, I'm on a Mac and I'm doing something in Node and I'm going to something else not Microsoft, right? I almost think it's a message.
Yeah.
And I almost think it is a message.
Yeah.
Message is we support you. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then if you get to the .NET side of the house, the message, which is right in that .NET Core roadmap, is Scott Hansen won't say any developer, any platform, any device,
Yeah.
right? So there's there's the whole corporate message of everybody. We're supporting everybody now. And then there's the .NET message of like, don't worry, you're a .NET developer, you want to do something on a Samsung TV, that's great. You want to do something on Raspberry Pi, that's great. You want to do something on Azure, that's great.
And enterprise developers, we're not leaving you behind either.
Yeah.
We're going to fully support you.
We're all one big
Yeah.
happy group of developers.
So
Just
what?
run on the Azure and run .core and you're fine.
Yeah.
On a fabric of some kind.
So another demo, or I don't know that they really went into this too much. Now they did talk a lot. Maybe we'll start off by talking about what does it mean when they talked about edge, the IoT edge, the intelligent edge. There's a definition there because it can get. I don't want it to get confused with edge.
Yeah.
Right.
We're not talking about the browser.
Right.
Right.
But the phrase intelligent cloud, intelligent edge. What's the difference between just using the cloud? There is a difference.
What my takeaway from that is, we talked about it a little bit earlier on, is this idea that I am using part of the device, whether it's your refrigerator, your web server, whatever it is, it's doing some of the smart computing, but you're still relying on the cloud to sort of connect everything together. But there is a piece of, the way I understood it was, I'm actually running a piece of Azure sitting on my device.
Yeah.
It isn't just core, it's actually like an Azure runtime.
So
That's what I took away.
There was also a product, I guess, a service. I don't know. It's called Azure Sphere.
Oh, yeah.
That they announced,
Yeah, we
and
weren't
then
sure
they
what that was
played
either.
A marketing video right after it, which you could
I'll see if I
bring
can
up.
find it.
Yeah, which they in the marketing video there was a bunch. There's like showing fridges and solar panels and a bunch of like these devices. And the way they were talking about it previously was like you're actually running code on this distributed network. And I just didn't get it. I don't even know what this is, but I think it was just one of those avenues, another avenue of IoT.
Rich is back there like, oh.
Yeah, right.
Or you could argue this is really the day HAL was born, and we're all screwed.
Yeah, right.
Our
Well,
refrigerators are going to revolt against us
I mean,
with the
for me, it was
TV and
just-
the Alexas.
It was like just different variations of what you're saying is that like the devices out in the world are getting a little bit more intelligent, and I think ultimately, and obviously Azure, the cloud is getting intelligent, and this intelligent edge is like almost we're giving you the platform that you can create solutions that almost you don't even really care. You don't have to worry. Like
It's
so
a
much is going to
distributed
be.
system. You don't care where it's hosted.
Yeah, it may be running in the cloud. It may actually be running in your device, and the devices are getting powerful enough now that you can actually do.
Well,
some
maybe
pretty
instead
great
of
things with
sending
it.
up a bunch of data, instead of just blindly sending all your events, billions of events to the
Yes.
cloud,
Yeah,
I can process some of these here. Like it's all local to me.
yeah.
The algorithm, I've got it. I'm powerful enough of a microprocessor. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
That's like the idea of an intelligent edge. Whereas Azure Sphere, some interesting things from the Azure Sphere announcement, things that businesses that Microsoft traditionally is not in. For example, designing a microcontroller, which the design they're going to give away. Like here you go, right? Here everybody build your refrigerators with this, right? And I shouldn't laugh about refrigerators because the devices they show are like medical devices and
Yeah,
really
smart
important things.
devices, things you can
And then the second thing, distribution of Linux. Now, this isn't the first time that I have heard through the grapevine, some blog post or something about Microsoft's going to have a distribution of Linux. It's never been, though, like they've never once said, like you've got Linux Mint or Ubuntu, and then you've got all the different desktops that people are really interested. That's not the game.
Right.
We're not going to be a CentOS. We're not trying to be a server. But we did take Linux and we said, let's use it as a base for something really small and targeted. Where in the past, and I'm thinking Xbox here,
Mhm.
for the original Xbox, they forced Windows in there. Like, I'm not sure at original Xbox timeframe that the console world was ready for, let's have a consumer OS in there. So they were out there hacking pieces, like rip it out.
I mean, it's
You
a
know-
whole history there, right? It wasn't the Saturn. The other Sega Dreamcast was actually running Windows CE.
Right.
In many ways, it was Xbox Zero.
So that was the old Microsoft, which was,
It has to be Windows everywhere.
it's got to be Windows, and
Yeah.
and you still see some of that because Xbox One has Windows, but I don't want to turn it into a gaming thing, right?
Yeah.
But the key is the approach. In the year 2000, it was we're going to build a console. This is a device to sit in your home. You don't really care about Windows, but we're going to put Windows in there anyway. It's going to be based on Windows. And today it's, hey, if what we really need is a Linux distribution, or why don't we start with that OS instead of building another one?
So trying to jam the 30 years of Windows code into a little device. Right?
Yeah.
Like a phone. Think about
Yeah.
Windows Phone.
So, well,
Yeah,
like,
that worked well.
what are
It worked
things
so
we
well.
didn't? What are words we didn't hear? Remember a couple builds ago, Nano Server that we
Yes.
didn't hear.
That sort of
that's-
has its own little story tied to it.
Right.
It's a whole other thing.
Not an OS anymore. Maybe a container. Does anybody?
That's what I was reading, that basically Nano is a container OS now.
And then
nothing
it
else.
makes you wonder, though, has the world passed that idea by?
Like containers or Nano
No, not
server?
containers, but Windows in a container.
I think that it's kind of the people who are really into containers look at it going, why do I need a 2 gigabyte solution?
Is it only for folks who I have no choice but to lift and shift out of here? I
Let me-
can't rewrite.
Let me talk about. I mean, I just came from an enterprise, and that's all we talked about. Was
Yeah.
we have hundreds of thousands of applications,
Yeah.
and the only way we're getting them onto the cloud in any reasonable time frame is lift and shift. I mean, that was the
Yeah. So you need
That was
you need a
it.
Windows
Yeah.
runtime. You need a full .NET runtime to get there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it'll have a place, but again, I think it'll be more of a niche. And
I mean,
eventually
at that point,
they'll be
it's
forced
basically
to
a
build.
Windows VM.
Yeah.
Right? Like not Nano Server. Nano Server is
Yeah.
not, but the Windows Docker image or the Windows container image is basically just a VM that you're managing with Docker.
I mean, eventually, I think they'll find a way to build I'm going to call it a hybrid, Windows Server Linux hybrid server
Yeah.
that'll be specifically geared towards just doing web hosting.
Yeah.
Right? Because ultimately, that's what you want in Nano Server, right? Most times, it's I just need to get my website deployed. When I ship the full .NET runtime, what do I have in there? I have all the old ASP.NET,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
If I don't need it, I have all WinForms.
Yep.
I don't need that on a server. I have a bunch of COM stuff. I have
Well, that was
remoting.
the-
I have all
yeah.
this stuff for 20 years.
Sure.
I need like two things, right? That's the idea of core, right? Core, I get just what I need. I just need to be able to run SQL Server. Great, that's all I need. I don't need to have every other driver.
And Chris has already moved on to SignalR.
No. I was trying.
There we
saying-
go.
So
We'll get to SignalR in a second.
no, I wasn't trying to switch away from it. I was just bringing
Two other
up.
quick things I want to make about the edge thing that I think is interesting. One is the idea that in the future, I could see IoT devices talking to themselves, right? Think about AI. AI, the real power of AI is they can work together and build and think things and figure out. So I can think almost like a grid computing type solution where Azure is a piece of it, but it's a node on this whole big set of nodes, as opposed to I have to have a centralized node server. The other thing is we all live in the enterprise, right? Who here is not an enterprise developer, right? You're still writing enterprise code. All your stuff's on the enterprise, right? Azure's great, but how do you get there? You're not moving everything to Azure day one. You need something like a hybrid type solution. So when I hear the word edge, I also think of that. This is Microsoft's way of saying, we know you're not ready, but we want you to go to Azure. So you know what? We're going to give you we're going to build a little bridge.
We're going to bring the edge to you.
We're going to bring a little edge to you, get you over the bridge.
Okay, you're right
And before
up
long, you're running a container.
Yeah.
And now you're like, well, now I'm just going to move your container over here to Azure.
Well, that's the Microsoft way, right?
Yeah, right.
Is
Build the bridge.
other folks have made some stuff and you tried using it and it was really hard. And if we can figure out how to put it either in one line of code or better yet, configuration, then you'll be happy.
Or versions through your template.
Yeah. And so speaking of one line of code, I just want to pick out one service. There's a ton of them, and I think there's a lot of things we can talk about. I kind of made my living in the community by talking about SignalR when it was brand new because it was the tech I was waiting for. And finally, here it is. It appeared. Somebody abstracted for .NET the whole idea of do I use WebSockets or long polling or whatever. And in the SignalR timeframe in .NET Framework, the number one question that I would get asked after demonstrating SignalR is somebody really smart would finally raise their hand and say like, now, I've been thinking this through, and it sounds like the client connecting back to the server to have this real-time notification, aren't they kind of sticky to that server? And how do I scale this thing out? And it's like, well, right, you're going to need a backplane. And you'd sound really smart talking about how, so if I have 4 SignalR servers, and all these clients are connecting to it, then you need something in the back. Maybe it's Redis Cache or SQL Server. There was also a service bus version of this. And Microsoft was building these backplanes. They were very easy to use. You went into your code and said use Redis. Yeah.
Use Redis.
But they actually didn't work great. They were a little on the slow side. They were big and heavy. Never really kind of worked quite right. And I've been waiting to understand, well, what's the .NET Core version of this going to be? Because SignalR is just now hitting with .NET Core 2.1. And I kept waiting, like, what's the backplane story? What's the backplane story? I'm still not hearing the backplane story. And so they announce at Build, surprise, we decided the way to do it is we're just going to build the service. And it's Azure SignalR service, and you just use that, and then you don't have to worry about setting up a backplane. And I go, okay, that's cool. And I guess I don't see the document. I'm not going to bother bringing up the documentation, but in typical Microsoft fashion, if you're familiar with ASP.NET Core at all, you go to configure services and you change from .use SignalR to .use Azure SignalR, and that's it. Granted, you've got some configuration stuff. You got to put some keys up in your
And some credit
You
card.
put your credit
number.
card
and you need a
Azure
credit card
service.
number, and I took a look at I immediately got interested in what are their connection limits, right? And they're saying, hey, you could do 2 million messages per unit per day, and so you would buy that. Okay, so we'll give you a server with 1,000 concurrent connections for 3 cents an hour. And I thought, okay, interesting. But I found it fascinating to see that